Welcome back. The Biden administration is set to meet with members of the Chinese Communist Party later this week in Alaska. It will be the first face-to-face meeting with the CCP since President Biden took office. The communist regime has been testing President Biden from day one, starting with sanctioning Trump officials like former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, marching into Hong Kong and bullying its neighbors in the South China Sea. China's endgame? Overtaking America as the world's leading superpower. And it will do whatever it takes to make that happen. The only question, does Joe Biden have what it takes to make them stop? Joining me right now to talk more about that is Republican Senator from Arkansas, Tom Cotton. And Senator, it's always great to see you. Thank you for being here tonight. What do you anticipate about this upcoming meeting between the Biden administration and the CCP members?
Well, I hope that Secretary of State Tony Blinken and the National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan will draw a very hard line in Alaska, and I hope that it's not a very hospitable trip for their Chinese counterparts, and those Chinese communists go back to Beijing very disappointed about America's bipartisan resolve to stand up to Beijing. But I have to say, Maria, based on a series of early missteps or hesitancies or mixed messages, I'm not confident that that is going to be the result of this meeting in Alaska later this week.
Well, you have been very smart and vocal about many things regarding the Chinese Communist Party. You were the first one to come on my program in 2020 to explain exactly how the coronavirus was allowed to leave the Chinese borders and inflict the entire world. I have not heard President Biden discuss the origins of the coronavirus. Have you?
No, I haven't either, Maria. That'd be a very good first item on the agenda in Alaska, is to demand that Beijing come clean about what happened in Wuhan and allow an international team of scientists, to include Americans, to visit the Institute of Virology in Wuhan and to have total and uncontrolled access to its personnel. So even if they've destroyed the evidence, we can at least take the statements of people who were there. That's not what the World Health Organization did last month when they sent a team in basically just to corroborate the Chinese story. That's just one thing, though, that should be on the agenda item. We should press them on their breaking their words and their international commitments on Hong Kong autonomy and the genocide they're perpetrating against religious and ethnic minorities in Western China. These are things that some Biden administration officials have raised, either in speeches or congressional testimony, but Joe Biden himself has been very reticent to push China on those issues, and that's not a strong signal to send to China's leader, Xi Jinping.
What should the U.S. be doing about this? I mean, I certainly remember Hong Kong to be an amazing international business hub where you felt that there was freedom. You certainly felt that there was opportunity. I understand from my sources in Hong Kong, it is a very bleak time right now in Hong Kong. Should the U.S. be responding to how the CCP has handled things?
Yeah, it's a terrible tragedy, Maria. Hong Kong has a vibrant history of freedom and democracy and the rule of law, and China committed to uphold that for 50 years in 1997 when they reclaimed sovereignty over Hong Kong from the United Kingdom. And not even a quarter of a century into that commitment, they broke it, and they're repressing all Hong Kongers now. China should have to pay for all of these transgressions, whether it's violating its commitments about Hong Kong or committing genocide against its own people or stealing our jobs and our property and using them to try to outpace us as the world's economic leader. Now, how they pay for that is up for us. So, for instance, one thing I've pressed our generals on, our admirals on in the Armed Services Committee as of late is that we need to be deploying as many ground-based missiles as possible to our territories in the Western Pacific and our allies to hold China at risk. They haven't faced that for a long time because we were constrained in an old and outdated treaty with Russia. But put a few hundred or more likely a few thousand missiles in the Western Pacific that can reach the Chinese mainland and will make the leaders in Beijing sweat a lot.
We also have not heard President Biden say much about the Uyghurs and the genocide that is being committed there. So we'll see if this comes up in this meeting. But I want to get your take on the upcoming Olympics. There is the Olympics happening in 2022. And Gordon Chang tweeted this. A friend asked, will China collect DNA samples of the athletes and others at the Olympics if they are held in Beijing? And he says, you bet. Do you think that the Chinese Communist Party will collect DNA of our athletes?
Well, I wouldn't put it past the Chinese Communist Party to undertake any kind of spying or espionage against Americans in Beijing. I think the International Olympic Committee needs to try to move these Olympics out of China. They were awarded under different circumstances when so many people still took the China threat for granted. Barring that, then I think we need to seriously consider Senator Romney's proposal that we have an economic and diplomatic boycott. Even if we send our athletes to compete, Americans don't go to watch. They don't spend money in hotels and restaurants and sightseeing. American corporations don't sponsor these games. So hit China where it hurts in these Olympics in their pocketbook. But there needs to be consequences for China's malign actions, not only against American interest, but against international peace and stability more broadly, and its brutal repression of its own people.
Now, let me ask you before you go, Senator, you are on the front lines in terms of ensuring that we have the agenda that will lead to progress in America. You've got H.R. 1, you've got a $1.9 trillion stimulus, you've got another package on the way that's coming, including higher taxes. A word about this agenda. How do you see it?
Well, I think it's a failed agenda. It's a radical agenda. Joe Biden is simply the front man for the far Democratic left that wants to spend trillions of dollars on their longstanding priorities, wants to rig the rules of our elections, wants to use your tax dollars to elect Democratic candidates, wants to pack the Supreme Court, and wants to make Washington, D.C. a state. It's not popular, and they're not going to do it.
Can you do anything about it to stop it?
Well, right now they don't have the votes to pass it because it's so unpopular. They've got divisions in their own party. They can't even pass most of these things through the House of Representatives, much less the Senate.
All right, Senator, it's good to have you this evening. Thanks very much. We will catch up soon. Senator Tom Cotton.